Okay, in this segment, I'm going to talk about the usefulness of selection processes, and we're going to go through decision accuracy, validity, base rate, and selection ratio in this section. And overall, what we're trying to figure out is what role all of these things play in the utility of our selection battery and the cost effectiveness of our selection battery. Okay, so let's get started with decision accuracy. So imagine that you have all these dots that are scatter plotted here, representing individuals who have applied for the job and have gone through the selection process. So we have in quadrant 1, which is the upper right hand quadrant, we have what we call hits. And these are those applicants who we hired and who were successful on the job. Quadrant 2 has correct rejections. So those are the applicants that we didn't hire and we shouldn't have hired. So those were correct rejections. Quadrant 3 represents what we call false alarms. These are applicants that we hired and we shouldn't have hired them. And then we have quadrant 4, which is what we call misses, which are people who were qualified and we should have hired, but we didn't. We passed on them. So you see across the x-axis the predictor battery, and we have that decision of either reject or hire. And then we have the criterion along the y-axis, and the criterion either is a failure or it's successful. So we want to maximize the quadrant 1 and 2 decisions, and we want to minimize the quadrant 4 and 3. Now you got to remember that quadrant 1, that our hires are going to be composed of quadrant 1s, the hits, people we should have hired and that we did hire, and the quadrant 3, right, which is where we hired them and we shouldn't have. So what we want to do for decision accuracy is figure out what portion of quadrant 1 divided by quadrant 1 plus quadrant 3, right? Like what proportion of those candidates are really just what proportion of those people that we hired are really just quadrant 1 people. So that'll help us to narrow down our selection battery if we can figure out which of our hires were hits, were successful hires, people we should have hired. Overall decision accuracy is going to be a combination of the people that we correctly hired plus the people who we correctly rejected divided by all the candidates, right? That's our overall decision accuracy. So the people who we correctly hired and the people who we correctly didn't hire divided by all the candidates. The goal is to maximize hits and correct rejections, and we want to really reduce those misses and false alarms. So that's really what we're trying to do through this process of tailoring our selection battery, right? We really want to develop a selection battery that's going to maximize our successful candidates, minimize hiring of failure candidates. We want to make sure that we are correctly rejecting and correctly hiring, right? So we really want to maximize those things. So that's why it's super important for IO psychologists to really work on tailoring selection batteries to the exact context that the hiring is occurring within. All right, now validity we've talked about before, right? But in this context, we're talking about maximizing hits and correct rejections while minimizing the misses and the false alarms, right? So if we have a good, valid battery, it will really sort out those people who would be a good match and who would do really well on the job versus those who would not. And so we really want to make sure that we have good, valid measurements. Now with base rate, we're talking about the percentage of current employees who are in fact successful on the job. So, if you have a really complicated job that, special people really can do really well at, there's probably going to be a high base rate of people who are less successful, right? There's going to be a higher base rate of less successful people who may be in the job because not everybody's going to be a superstar at the job, right? There's like some people are going to be doing okay, and some people are going to be doing well, and some people are going to be doing really well. So if you're in a field where the base rate of successful people on the job is pretty low, We have to keep that in mind, right? I'm thinking of like salespeople. Some people are just superstar salespeople. There's a TV show that is based in Everett, Washington that just started on HGTV. So yes, like to watch a little TV. And the show's called Unsellable. And it's a pair of twin sisters who are real estate agents. And they buy houses that have sat on the market too long. They fix them up, and then they sell them and split the profits with the owners, right? In the beginning of their introduction, they said the average real estate agent sells, 8 to 15 houses a year. And last year we sold, I can't remember the name, like 8,000 houses, some crazy number. Most salespeople aren't going to be in that category where they're, right? Because if the average is 8 to 15, clearly they are outside the average, right? So some people are going to be really amazing. Some people are going to be pretty horrible at the job. And then we're going to have some, a lot of people maybe in that category of salespeople that are, okay. We want to take that into consideration. What is the base rate of success in this job? What is the criterion of success? I don't think selling as many thousands of houses as they sell is probably the criterion for success, right? So we want to make sure that we know what the base rate of success is before we start expecting all of our candidates to reach that base rate. If it's a low number, you wouldn't expect all of your new hires to reach that success level when really it's only a few people who reach that. So we have to figure out, and that's what we mean by base rate, like how common is it for people to actually be successful on this job? And then we have the selection ratio. The number of job openings divided by the number of applicants. Okay, now this is where recruitment comes in, right? Because the smaller the ratio, the greater the potential utility of the selection battery. So if you have 5 job openings and 100 applicants, right, you're going to have a more useful selection battery because you're going to be able to apply that selection battery to a larger number of people who you're going to be able to reject a lot of them and focus in on just the people who are really doing well on that selection battery, who are really revealing that they will do well on the job. So the more candidates we can get in, the more we can really fine tune our selection battery to make sure that we're actually measuring the qualities that we need to measure and we're really predicting success. So this really brings up that role of recruitment, right? The more options we have in applicants, the better our selection battery will do. And the more likely we can choose people who are going to have a good chance of success, right? Because if we have lots of applicants, we can sort of sort through them. If you have a very unsuccessful recruitment campaign and, 3 people show up for your 5 jobs and you really need bodies in those jobs, you may just hire those 3 people. And it doesn't matter what the battery says. You may not even administer the battery. You might go through the motions because we have to. But the thing is, it's not going to be very useful because you still have 2 empty spots and you hired everybody who showed up. Right. So we need to make sure that recruitment component is there to make sure that we're getting lots of candidates in there so we can actually hire the best of those candidates, the ones who will be the best fit for this job. Cost. So I'm not sure that my little thing is a good example here, but so we've got revenue from hiring better employees and the costs of developing and implementing the tool, right? And we want to make sure, I don't want to imply that one's going down and one's going up. What I wanted to imply with my little picture is we want to balance those 2 things, right? So if we invest thousands and thousands of dollars into developing and implementing a selection battery, and the employees that we have hired since the implementation of that battery are doing no better on the job, they are not increasing our revenue or reducing the expenses that we have with regard to training new people frequently and other things. If it's really not helping us with our revenue, that was a huge waste developing this really expensive selection battery. It's not improving our employee performance. On the other hand, if our if hiring better employees that are more likely to be satisfied with their job, there's going to be a better match between their KSOWs and what the job offers. And, they're more committed to the company and they stay there and we're satisfied with them and everybody's satisfied. Well, then that was really worth it to develop a selection battery because it's actually producing employees that are doing for us what we need done. So if our revenue is going down or not increasing, and the cost of developing and implementing the battery is too high, employers are going to say this is not worth it. So this is if any of you are thinking about becoming IO psychologists or working for an HR department, this is something that's really important when we're trying to figure out ways to select employees, right? Is that we want to make sure that it's worth it to the organization to invest up front so that we can get better employees in the long run. And so that's the balancing act. When the revenue to costs kind of meet in the middle, like it was worth it to spend that money to develop it because look at how our revenue changed or improved or whatever, or our retention improved or whatever our metric is, then we're going to say it's worth it. So we want to make sure that, again, I've mentioned this before, more aspects in our selection battery will improve on average our predictability, but only if you're including things that matter and only if you're including things that are relevant to the job, right? So we don't want to just throw a bunch of things into the pool of things we could administer and say, well, let's see which one works. I mean, a lot of times the employer is like, we're not hiring you again as a consultant for our company. You cost us a bunch of money and it didn't give us any better employees. So it's always really important to balance how much it costs versus what it'll do for us. Okay, now this last segment, the legal issues, I'm going to save that for my last lecture. So I will see you guys back in the next segment.